Good morning. Today we look at 1 Chronicles 12 through 15. And just a brief recap. The end of chapter 10, Saul had died. Chapter 11, David is now king, and he has conquered Jerusalem. If we remember back in 2 Samuel, the conquest of Jerusalem wasn't quite as easy for David. But, David has conquered Jerusalem, and he is king of all Israel. And as chapter 12 begins, it talks about all of the men, the different armies, soldiers from different tribes of Israel, the different lands of Israel, because there was, Jerusalem was in Judah, the southern kingdom, and the northern kingdom was made up of the other 10 tribes. The Levites, didn't have a specific area, but, there were the Benjaminites and the Gadites and, all of the the descendants of the different tribes of Israel, because each, in Israel, the northern kingdom, there were those 10 land divisions. And so people, soldiers from all of these different areas come to David and to become his army. And if you were to go through and add up all of the numbers, it's a tremendously large army and a lot of people that way. And, it says, I think it was right in the beginning of chapter 12 there, these warriors come, there were archers and could shoot arrows and sling stones with either the right hand or the left hand. So they were very experienced, very skillful. And, it's, part of the shaking of the right hand was so that you wouldn't be drawing your sword because, the majority of the people being right-handed. But with these people being able to use either hand equally, that kind of negated that aspect, just as something I thought about, but doesn't say anything about that in the Bible, of course. But in verse 16 of chapter 12, there are some, it says, Benjaminites and Judites came to David. And David sends the messenger out, if you are coming to help me, I welcome you. And if you're not coming to help me and to join me, then, if you're going to be my adversaries, then may the God of our ancestors give judgment. But these men came, we are yours, David. We came to serve you, to be a part of your army. And then in verse 19, we go back a little bit in remembering as David was kind of conscripted into the Philistine army previous to Saul's death. There was a group of these Manassites, this one tribe had deserted from the Philistine army to follow David when the Philistines decided, well, we can't have David and these Israelites in our army attacking Saul because, they could just join with Saul against us, and so here's this remembrance of that time, previous to Saul's death, that this group of soldiers had begun to follow David and were a part of his army. And again, at the end of verse 22, indeed from day to day people kept coming to help him until there was a great army, like an army of God. And, like an army of God. When I hear that, I think of the angels and the archangels and of, Jesus, I could call down a whole host of heavenly angels, if I needed to. And, but, there is no overpowering God. And so this image of the great army, like an army of God, and God was leading David. David was very much in God's favor. So when David went to battle, he consulted with God, and we're going to read about that in just a minute too. But so this army of God, of all of these men, this nation of Israelites that God had taken to be His people, God was definitely leading and guiding them. And so again, the next verses, really talk about the vast numbers of the men of the different tribes. The people of Judah were 6,800, which sounds like a lot, but then there's other ones that are, like 4,600. But further down, there's with Naphtali, there were 37,000 armed. I mean, that's quite a sizable army to come from the land of Naphtali, you know, and so as I mentioned earlier, that, you know, this number of these people that come, this number that this army becomes is a huge number. And so God is leading David and the people of Israel, and they have all come together as this united kingdom of Israel. And then chapter 13 talks about, you know, David bringing the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. And we hear again that story that we heard in Samuel of as they were coming, and you know, the cart or whatever the ark was being carried on shook, and this man Uzzah, you know, reached out just to make sure it didn't tip over, and God's anger flared against Uzzah. And as we read on a little bit more, and we find out that there was a distinction between Levites and priests, and so maybe it wasn't the priests that were carrying the ark at that time, and but and David was upset with God, so he didn't take that Ark of the Covenant into the city of Jerusalem at that time, but he left it in the possession of Obed-Edom, and you know, for 3 months. And again, you know, the same thing we read, you know, back in Samuel, that, you know, the family of this man, you know, was blessed. The Lord blessed the household and all that he had, you know, because the ark was there. And chapter 14, we end up with a little bit of, again, this king of Tyre sending messages to David, you know, offering friendship, offering working together for the good of all, which we really need to have a whole lot more of. But you know, the king Hiram of Tyre, you know, they have this agreement with Israel, and you know, we read earlier about how this king, you know, supplied a lot of the wood and different things for some of what David was building. Verse 3, I mean, again, this is, you know, David returned and he took many more wives and had many more sons and daughters, and it just baffles me, you know, that these men, kings especially, we would hear of them having so many wives, and it's just so foreign, a foreign thought to us that way. You know, I always figured, you know, that marriage is one man, one woman, but yet we read, you know, of this difference of things that way. So we have that, just a brief deal, a couple of verses about David marrying many more, having wives and having children. And then verse 8, the Philistines hear that David has been anointed king and decide to attack him. And David asks God about it. And God says to David, go, attack them, and I will be with you. And they're successful in that battle. And that's, you know, verses 8 through 12. Starting at verse 13, the Philistines again come, and David consults the Lord. Shall I go in battle? And God says to him, no, go around behind. And again, we've read this account of these battles against the Philistines in Samuel, so that, you know, it's these different books, you know, are telling the stories in a little bit different manner, but reminding us of God's faithful leadership of his people. Chapter 15, where we finished today, David was, you know, building up the city of Jerusalem, which becomes known then as the city of David, as does Bethlehem. But as he's building up everything and getting things ready, in verse 11, then David he summons the priests and these leaders of the Levites, and says to them, you know, you are the head of the families, you are the heads of the priests, and, you know, here it is, because you did not carry it the first time, carry the Ark of the Covenant into the city, you know, you did not carry it, we did not give it proper care. You know, so David is realizing that that's what happened. And so he says to the priests, sanctify yourselves, set yourselves apart, prepare yourselves rightly. And then they go and they bring the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem. And again, as this chapter ends, we read of David's wife, Michal, the daughter of Saul, sees David dancing as he comes in, celebrating and rejoicing that the Ark of the Covenant is coming in, and she despises him in her heart because of his joy for bringing the Ark of the Covenant of God into the city. And was because she says that he has embarrassed himself and her in front of all of the people. And, as far as we can tell in the Bible, she's the only one that feels that way. But the Ark of the Covenant came then into the city of Jerusalem, the city of David, and to its place where it, rested then until, as we're going to read later on sometime, Solomon builds the temple, and the Ark then becomes moved to the temple. Just again, a continuing story of God and God's leadership now of King David, but always God's faithfulness to his people.